This is an NBC News special report. Here is Matt Lauer.
And good morning, everyone. The U.S. Supreme Court has just handed down one of the most anticipated decisions in decades, a ruling on President Obama's signature health care law that is sure to have sweeping ramifications for millions of Americans and, of course, politically impact the presidential race as well. NBC's Justice correspondent Pete Williams is now pouring through that decision. He has it in his hands. We're going to get to him at the Supreme Court in just a couple of minutes. I'm also joined by David Gregory, of course, our moderator of Meet the Press, and Savannah Guthrie is our legal correspondent. She joins me here in New York. And while we wait for Pete to go through the document that probably is more of a novel than a pamphlet, Savannah, let's talk about the options that the justices had.
We think it will be a lengthy opinion because there are four discrete issues before the court. Number one, is it time for the justices to hear this case? It's basically a jurisdictional question, whether it's premature for them to decide the case right now. If they say we can decide it right now, they get onto the central issue, whether that individual mandate that requires every American to get a minimum amount of health insurance, whether that exceeds the federal government's power under the Constitution. If the court were to strike down that mandate, they'd have another more complicated question. How much of that more than 1,000-page law could actually survive? Could they sever it, or would they have to strike it all down? And then finally, one last issue. There is a huge expansion of Medicaid in this law. Some states have said it's so big, it puts such a burden on us, it violates the federal government's power.
And just to go over this idea that Pete is pouring through this complicated document, we might not be in for one decision here. We could be in for multiple decisions with majorities and minorities on all of those things.
There's no question, and there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, to use the old saying. I mean, for example, the court could uphold the mandate, but for different reasons. We could have a deeply fractured court, so there could be an end result, but different rationales for the various results we may see.
We'll know all this in a moment, David, but as you join us, let's talk about the fact that the Obama administration has been anxiously awaiting this decision. How much hangs in the balance for the president?
We have a presidential election coming up in about 4.5 months, and that's really what's been hanging over all of this, as you can imagine, Matt. And interrupt me anytime when you get word of this. That's really the impact here. If any of this is struck down, the president's in a very difficult political situation where he's got to try to defend what's left and also talk about the implications. Republicans, including Mitt Romney, who about a year ago this week announced for president, one of his major arguments would be that he would repeal the president's health care law. So all of this will be seen in the context of how both sides will argue this as we move forward over the next weeks and months leading up to Election Day.
And we're seeing some comments on blogs already that Savannah is passing in front of me saying this ruling is very, very complicated. The White House, David, putting out the scenario that this is not all or nothing, that they might be able to claim some limited or partial victory here. Is that realistic?
Well, it is, at least.
David, let me interrupt you. Excuse me, David. Pete Williams is now ready for us at the Supreme Court. Pete, good morning. Take us through.
Okay, the bottom line here is the Supreme Court has upheld the health care case. They've said that it can't be upheld under the Commerce Clause. The individual mandate can't. This is Chief Justice Roberts writing for the court. But he said it can be upheld under the court's taxing authority. So the bottom line here is the Supreme Court has upheld the health care law. It is a penalty, not a tax. Nonetheless, the Chief Justice says it can be upheld under the court's taxing authority. Now, I haven't had any chance to read what the vote breakdown is here, but it is Chief Justice John Roberts writing the majority opinion saying that you can't uphold the mandate under the Commerce Clause. So this gets at the argument that it's wrong for Congress to require everyone to buy health insurance. So they've left the penalty, the tax, intact, and they say Congress can do this under the taxing authority. So let me just take a brief moment to look at the vote breakdown,
right,
Matt.
Go ahead. You do that. Let me bring Savannah back in. This sounds a little complicated and confusing for the average person. What exactly is being said here?
It's actually a very interesting result. It's interesting that we have the Chief Justice writing the opinion, and we'll learn, of course, I assume, that the left, the ideologically left members of the court join him in this. There were really two theories of constitutionality that the federal government was arguing. First, they said this is a valid exercise of the federal government's power under the Commerce Clause. It appears the court rejected that argument. That was the main argument.
And yet saved it.
Alternatively, there was an argument that, look, we have the mandate. We enforce the mandate with a penalty. And the penalty, in essence, is a tax. And the federal government has a rather unfettered ability to tax. And that's what the court held on to, saying, because of the federal government's taxing power, the mandate operates as a tax, and therefore it is constitutionally okay. It is a very, I guess, perplexing result because, of course, politically, when this was fought out in the Congress, the Obama administration said this isn't a tax, but in the legal papers, they took the legal position that it was, and it was valid under the taxing authority.
All right, David, let me get you back in here because you know that the Obama administration and the president himself are watching this, and what they know right now is that millions of Americans heard the headline coming from people like Pete Williams that the Supreme Court has upheld the health care law. What's the reaction going to be at the White House?
Well, that's a huge victory. This is crucial in the White House view that the individual mandate be part of comprehensive health care reform, that if you're going to achieve something approaching universal coverage, that you have to be able to pay for it. And one of the ways that you can pay for some of the benefit is if, people with prior conditions are accepted on health care plans without insurance rates going up, and that everybody has to have a stake in that system, not just those who need health care, but younger people who may not need much from the health care system. They need to have insurance as well. That's part of the balance that makes this work. By the way, it's not just the president who argued that the individual mandate was important. So did Mitt Romney. Back when he was pushing a health care law in Massachusetts, he argued that an individual mandate was as important as well. It's something that conservatives pushed for way back under when Hillary Clinton was trying this, saying that that was part of what was necessary. So this is a central tenet. We'll see how the rest of this shapes out, but this is very, very important for the administration.